Hello everyone, welcome to Grow Your Future with Luxland. I am Zar, the CEO of Luxland Investments. Today I am joined by Mark Fator, our Business Development Manager. How are you, Mark?
I'm very well. G'day guys, how are we?
What do you want to talk about on our first episode?
Well, I think it would be a very wise idea to let people that do not know about us, who we are and what we do.
Right, so we're developers at heart. That's what we originated from. We are also buyers agents, and we are keen property investors ourselves. This podcast is probably more so directed for people just wanting to educate themselves on property investment and business. We have an extensive experience with property and business spanning of over 10 years. We understand that it is hard to find good information out there and trustworthy advisors that where you can know that the information is true and correct. And I just wish we had this back in the day when I bought my first property back in 2008.
Definitely.
Social media wasn't around then, and podcasts weren't around then, so I had to learn the hard way.
The organic way, wasn't it? Not that it's not organic now, but it's just so heavily saturated. But it's now almost like it's almost like a jungle. You've got to sift through all the shrubs.
There's too much.
Yeah, just to find the quality stuff. So hopefully this is something that we can get out to all the listeners around Sydney and further in regards to property investing and how to play it smart. I think rather than just doing what the guy next to them did, because what may work for someone might not work for you. That's how I see it. But yeah,
well, almost like property mentors. Like you use us and our experiences to your advantage. And we've made plenty of mistakes. We've failed plenty of times.
Definitely.
And if you don't have to make those mistakes, why? Why do it yourself? Fast track yourself to success by learning from other people's mistakes. And that's the one thing I guess I never had when I was growing up. We just didn't have access to enough information.
No.
Now we've got our phones and internet, social media, YouTube. You've got so much information at your fingertips, and I think what happens is that people just take it for granted. And
within seconds, you're right.
Instantly, you can get information instantly now, and you can read up on how other people have succeeded in property investment and in business, and you just follow what they've done, and
100%.
Learn from their mistakes.
Yeah, and there's no point in looking all of this if you're not going to action it as well. That's something we're very big at here at Luxland, is always actioning things, because a lot of people blow a lot of smoke essentially, where they just talk, and they get themselves gassed up, ready to do it, but they don't execute. And at the end of the day, something that I'll probably say for the rest of my life now is it's about time in the game, not timing the game, which is something that people are, I guess, with the let's call it the, not small amount of money, but the majority of us don't have millions of dollars in the bank, and we can't just buy a property like that and do it again and again and again. We need to be smart with our investments. But it's about starting somewhere. We need to start somewhere, and even if that is only just being hard on yourself this time around to look online, or instead of like we've all been
or listen to this podcast.
Yeah, that's right. We've all been guilty of looking at something stupid on the internet, to pass time. Instead, why don't we educate ourselves on the market? And that might even just be like going, okay, you know what, I'm going to actually look on, for example, real estate or domain, .com.au, and only just look at a certain suburb and watch the trends over the next 3 months, we'll call it. To start small. But again, it's about actioning things, and that's something that I feel as though the millennial market, which is our market, both you and I, we need to help them basically, hold everyone, by the hand kind of thing, and say, come with us, because we're doing it for ourselves. You for examples are you have multiple businesses. You don't have a stable job where the banks will look at you and go, okay, yep, no worries. But you've been very smart in the way that you do all this stuff in regards to all your paperwork is right. Your businesses are selected correctly so that they give you the right amount of cash flow, to continue to get more property. And that's been something that, which we'll get into now, is your background. Like the common denominator across let's say, call it the last 10 years since you've been, or even 10 to 15 years, you have been in property from as early as you could be. So please give us a bit of a background on you.
So, I guess my education started, at a young age of 16 when I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Fantastic book.
Great book. Which, getting back on what you were saying, Mark, about, taking that first step, if people haven't started educating themselves, that'll probably be a good start, next to this podcast of course, being episode 1. Yeah. So that started at 16 years old, and I was always interested in property from such a young age. So what I used to do is, I never really had that much money, so I'd go to newsagents and just read the magazines, the property investment magazines. I think there's not many around these days. No. Australian Property Investor, I think that's gone, but your Smart Investment Property magazine or something like that. And I used to read these magazines every month in the newsagents until they eventually caught on and they'd kick me out of the newsagent, and then I'd move on to reading the same magazines in Coles, because I figured out that you can't really get kicked out of Coles.
No, you can't.
So and I still have a cheeky flick through magazines when I'm out and about, and grab a book in a bookstore and have a read of a few chapters, and it's just a habit that I've picked up from a really young age. So I did that for about 10 years up until 2008 when I bought my first property. I worked 3 to 4 jobs just to save my deposit of $70,000 to put towards a property on the Central Coast that was worth $340,000.
Yep.
That particular property I still have in my portfolio, which is undergoing a renovation right now, and once we're done with it, should be worth in excess of $1 million. So
wow, fantastic.
We've done really, really well out of that
well.
one. And I've done well out of that from day one. Like in the first year, I made $110,000 in equity, so I was able to pull that out and buy another property, which was quite similar to that one. And, things rolled on from there. I had a bit of a break from property investing in about 2012 to about 2015 because I was concentrating more so on my businesses, and, which I used equity from my businesses to pour in, equity from my properties to pour into the businesses.
Yep.
So, I've, to date now, I own and control assets in excess of $10 million. But it hasn't been easy. There's been a lot of failures along the way, and it's been a lot of struggles along the way, and a lot of bad partnerships, and bad businesses that I've bought into, and but it's those failures that kind of make you,
definitely.
So
definitely.
You've got to go through them to appreciate the good times. And you know what, I wouldn't be in this position today if I didn't make some of those bad decisions.
Definitely. That's quite a large amount of a large amount portfolio, I should say, in what you've acquired over the last 10 years. So well done on that. Mind telling the listeners out there what it spans from? Is it residential, commercial, development sites?
Look, it's a mix of a lot of that. A lot of the portfolio is made up of commercial because of the development sites. So they are JV projects with other business partners.
JV being a
joint venture.
Yep.
But the residential side, which is probably on my personal, just me is what I own, or my wife and I, sits around about the $4 million mark.
Yeah.
And we've had some really, really good growth out of it. It's what's funded sort of our lifestyle and our businesses moving forward. But the majority is in commercial because we're going through the plans to obviously develop and build apartments and all of those sort of things. But as we do go through our planning process, we are getting a rental income on the commercial assets. So it's not that much of a burden right now.
Obviously, with such an extensive background and knowledge in property, for the listeners out there as well, I think if you can elaborate a little bit on this, but for the people that are trying to get into the market, right, that are listening to this podcast, and that have kind of pigeonholed themselves to the Sydney market only, what do you have to say about that? Like any tips and advice that you could kind of offer within this introduction first episode that we're having, just because it's something that's, I guess, on a lot of people's minds, even on my mind. It's something where, my background, I've had a business for anywhere between 4 and 5 years, and the banks have been a little bit tight since leaving that. But I have a property in Sydney, and now I know the time is where, even though that property has gained a lot of equity, I know that I wouldn't say 110% the smartest idea, but it's definitely the right move for myself personally, is to go outside of Sydney. So what are your thoughts on stuff outside of Sydney?
Well, we live in a different time now, Mark. We're heading towards the way New York is heading, where it's a city full of renters, and I personally wouldn't buy in Sydney unless it was probably a commercial asset, only because yields are quite low. We're at the peak of the cycle now, and there's almost no more room left for margin. I rent myself in the inner city. I rent an apartment with my wife, and because we're quite central to all the businesses, and it's quite convenient for us. We like the lifestyle of living in the city. However, all of our residential real estate sits on the Central Coast in Newcastle. So, we see better returns in those markets. And I've got friends who invest in Brisbane and Hobart and all of those sort of things, because they're experts on those areas, where I'm an expert on the Central Coast and Newcastle.
I guess that would work for them as the Central Coast and Newcastle works for you.
Yeah, you know what? There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to property. It is what you make of it. And like I said, we are living in a new time where we're not in a time where it's just the boring old property investment sort of industry anymore. Like, look at me, for example. I have a very interesting past where I've got so many different areas of expertise in different industries, and to the point where PR companies don't even want to know me because it's just too messy for them to deal with, right?
Yeah.
But it's just the way of the world. Like, things are changing, and people need to adapt. Like you said, with the lending criteria of the banks these days, these are the cards that we've been dealt. Like our parents, for example, they went through their own set of hurdles. Like, I think there was, at one point, interest rates were almost as high as 20%.
Yeah.
Right? So imagine if that happened to us.
Yeah. Oh.
The truth is, right now, if interest rates rise to, say, 7 to 8%, then there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be losing their homes. So, we've actually got it pretty good. We've just got to work with what we've been given, and unfortunately, the majority of us aren't going to be able to afford to buy in Sydney. So we need to look at other markets.
That's something I've said in a recent article I posted up about 2-3 weeks ago now, where on my LinkedIn, and it was about adapting and about not giving up hope. There's still plenty of hope, and for the majority of the millennials, we've got let's call it 50 to 75 years ahead of us. There's a long time to go, and the markets will change 2-3 times over probably by the time we pass, if we live to that long. But
we're always going to go through cycles,
of course. Yeah, and I mean, now we're seeing a very strong one. Obviously,
we may not see a boom like this
ever again
for as long as we live.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe our kids might, but it's just been we're all just waiting for it to stabilise. You know what I mean? However, in saying that, you can make money in any market. You just got to know your product.
And one thing you just said there, we're waiting for it to stabilise. See, I've heard a lot of people say that as well, and they're wishing and hoping and getting on their knees going, oh,